Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today's topic, why did I stop reading the Quran? And why did I start again? So as a Muslim growing up in Pakistan, Islam is part of our lives, and you hear Quran recitations all the time, and in our prayers, in our practices, there are verses of the Quran. In our stories of the prophets, we are drawing from the stories as they are told in the Quran. And so you kind of grow up with it, and it's part of your life. And then as a teenager, I started reading the Quran on my own. My father actually had lots of Quran books, and I still have some of them. And this is one, it's a small one, and this is a much bigger, larger one. And so he had all these Quran translations in his personal library, and I started exploring and paying attention and started reading on my own, just kind of studying. I've always studied this kind of thing, and so as I was reading, I learned a lot more than I knew before, and understood some of the details of the stories that I did not know before. And as I got into it more and more, some of the harshness of the language of the Quran stayed with me. Where God is speaking to people who are outright denying his revelations and denying his message, and not living according to the rules and standards that he has for them. And then there's all this language about sending them to very hot places. And so I got turned off by that. And a lot of people get turned off by that, and they stop reading. There are Christians who've told me that they've stopped reading the Bible because of that, and other people who have that kind of reaction as well. There are similar scriptures in Buddhism that talk about it. There are similar scriptures in Hindu traditions that talk about it, and so on. So a lot of people get turned off by that, and for a long time the Quran became kind of a difficult thing, a difficult book to approach. And I noticed that was also happening with many other people within our own Muslim communities and outside. Other friends of mine and other associates would say, I tried reading the Quran, but it's very difficult, it's dense, and I wasn't able to get too far into it. And for many years, from high school to college, I did not touch it. And then, very interestingly, I was going through a lot of things personally, emotionally, mental health wise. Back then, you didn't call it mental health. You just, they didn't really have a name for it. But I was going through my own kind of, mental issues and difficulties, and trying to reach for something. I was going through a type of crisis, not just growing up, but many layers of being a human being, and having to make new decisions, having to make new thoughts, new opinions on things, meeting different people in college who come from very different backgrounds, and faith backgrounds or no faith backgrounds, and things like that. It all kind of mixes together, and it affects you, and you then have to find a different way of moving in the world. And in that time, I was having a very hard time, and felt very lonely, and did not know who to turn to, did not have a lot of support in that area. And I went back to my father's library, and I pulled out his Quran. And I read it with very different eyes. I read it looking for something. I read it reaching for something. And I tell you, in the first few days when I was reading it, I cried and cried and cried. It was like those verses were speaking to me for the very first time in my life. So there was a period of time in which I wasn't reading the Quran, and then I started reading again, and it started speaking to me. I was on my knees. I was asking Allah for help, and He sent it through the Quran. And certain questions that I had that people could not answer. My parents couldn't answer them. The kind of religious teachers and elders that I was in contact with couldn't answer them. And I was searching and looking, and I could not find the answers. And some of the answers that I was looking for came. But the interesting thing is, I've read those verses before, right? I read them in high school, but I had a very different mindset. I had a very different approach. I had a very different life situation that I was in when I read those verses. It was very different than what was happening when I was in college. Different mindset, different approach, different everything. I had a different kind of foundation that I was bringing to that reading. And so I started reading the Quran again, and I started reading it very seriously, and from front to back, and all the stories, the prophets, and the kind of signs of God in creating the world, in the stories of the different events in the life of early Muslim history, how God was speaking to Muhammad. Some of the Quran is kind of history, some of it is contemporary to Muhammad's time. There's things Allah is saying to the Prophet Muhammad. Those are commands to him, and those are commands that he is then following and obeying. And so my understanding of the Quran became very layered, whereas before I was looking for kind of black and white. What is it? What's in it? Is it good or bad? Helpful? Not helpful? I just needed something simple. Later in college and afterwards, I began to develop a more nuanced understanding of what is in there and what is possible for a reader of the Quran. When you read any scripture, you come with your own interpretation, you come with your own framework that gives you a window into what you're reading, and that window becomes the way where you find out whether this is going to help you or not. But you bring that window. It's not sitting in the Quran. You, the reader, brings that type of reading to the Quran. And so one of the spiritual practices that I want to highlight is get back in touch with the Quran. Don't think that this is too complex, too abstract, too difficult, that you need an external authority to give you permission, that you need somebody else to find your way. Because the Quran was not revealed to a group of scholars. The Quran was not revealed to experts. The Quran was not revealed to people with PhDs in Arabic and Islamic studies. The Quran was revealed to, first and foremost, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and second, to the people around him. The Quran was given to him to give to them. And by extension, the Quran was given to him to give to us. So the Quran is for you. It's yours. Allah brought the Quran down for you. And so this type of approach makes it very different. Now, the Quran is not saying that it understands what your life looks like in the 21st century as a modern person. What it's saying is that this is a 7th century document, and it's a series of messages. It's not really a book with the beginning and an ending. It's a series of messages that were given to Muhammad. They were later compiled into a book. And we have to kind of prayerfully and thoughtfully approach the Quran and find the things in it that speak to us, find things in it that give us a certain compass, a certain direction, guidance, and so on. And so the Quran is for everyone, men, women, children. It's for everyone. And, you know, we are still at the beginning of our studies into the Quran. Even though 1400 years have passed, there's still so much we can still study about the Quran and still learn. We haven't really dented it in, you know, from what I've seen. We haven't barely begun to understand. And so there's an opportunity there for you and me and all of us to take the Quran and prayerfully and thoughtfully start reading it. What's in it? What are these stories? What does it say? What is Allah's vision for the people of Makkah and Medina in the time of the Prophet? What is Allah's vision for all humankind? What is Allah's vision for you? If you prayerfully read the Quran and ask for that vision to be given to you, little by little, you'll start seeing, noticing, feeling, intuiting, in some way, your appreciation and sense of this will start to grow stronger and stronger and stronger. Well, you know, one of the first Qurans that I read was this one from Yusuf Ali translation, very popular. You know, it's just extremely well known, and it's got, you know, a lot of commentary. That's why it's so thick. The Quran isn't actually this thick, but it's got just a huge amount of commentary. So, you know, that's a decent one to start with. But the one that really stayed with me was this one called the Glorious Quran, text and explanatory translation by Marmaduke Pickthall. He was a British gentleman who converted to Islam and did this translation of the Quran. And because this book is nice and small and it's, you know, pretty compact, I took this with me to college, and this was in my book bag every day. I took it to class. Between classes, I would just open it up and just, you know, and read and learn and just kind of keep in touch with my spiritual commitments, my spiritual practice, and Quran reading became part of my life. And, you know, so it doesn't really matter what translation you use right now, but as long as you can get started, you know, inshallah, we'll have much better translations in the near future, and, you know, a lot of kind of study material around the Quran. But it's so important to get started. You may have one in your house, you may have one on the shelf. You know, take it down, start reading, start taking notes. I mean, it'll change something. It'll affect you. So don't undermine or, you know, not pay attention to this very strong aspect of our spiritual practice as Muslims, the the study of the Quran, the actual, you know, thoughtfulness and approach to the Quran from a perspective of a humble seeker seeking to learn more about Allah and His vision for our lives. And this is precisely what inspired me to write a book on the Quran, my Remember Who You Are. So, you know, a lot of friends told me that, you know, I would love to read the Quran, but I tried and it's so hard and I don't have a good introduction to it. And I said, you know what, I'm going to write one. So I picked 28 verses from the Quran, like core verses, and I translated them into simple, readable English, and, you know, have a 1,500 word commentary on how you can live that verse in your daily life. And I wrote Remember Who You Are, and to help toward that. So it's a good introduction to the Quran for Muslims as well as a broad interfaith audience. And so I want to just, you know, leave you with that thought that the Quran is a part of our spiritual practice. And there is much to be gained with the right approach and the right mindset and the right attitude. And so I hope you will make that a part of your Ramadan, your readings during Ramadan. And I will cover some of the topics from the Quran in future talks. And I will look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you very much. May you have a blessed Ramadan.